What I'd like to discuss with you now is the products module of TSM. Products really have two purposes within TSM. They define the parts that we use on a job, typically to then bill out to the customer, and they also define the equipment that that customers have, their assets, their whatever, that we can do service on. So they're both defined in here via its part number and description, but those two different concepts are used very differently within TSM. So if we have a look at what information we have about a product, we typically have a product type, whatever category you want to make that product, a manufacturer. You can break it down into a category, whether it's equipment or spare parts or whatever it happens to be, and the search screens let you filter down to this level. You can set up the sell unit of measure and purchase unit of measure of this product. So you may, for example, buy it by the pallet, sell it by the each or the dozen or the whatever it happens to be.
So it's like minimum quantity purchase.
No, it's not minimum quantity. It's unit of purchase. It'll convert the pallet into 144 units when we receive it into stock automatically.
Right.
For example, that's what a pallet happens to be. So that's called sell and purchase unit of measure. Who the default supplier is for this particular product, but as you'll see later, we can have multiple suppliers against this particular product. We can define override tax codes for this product if it happens to be different. So for example, wine might have a different tax code from general consumer goods because the government determines that it has a different tax code, for example. So you can have various different tax codes set up in here. You can also have a purchase tax code. For example, if you know that you always buy this from an overseas country, then you may default the tax code to be free of GST, for example, when you do the purchasing for this particular product. Various things to do with the accounting system here, I won't go into, which are default account codes for this particular product. I really won't go into it. I don't have anything set up here at the moment for that. And then we have an overview of our stock holding for this product, in overall how much we have on hand, committed, available, requested, on order, on stock order, and so on. And I'll talk about stock control at another time as far as that's concerned. We have various options here. We can expire stock so that they don't appear in our search lists anymore. We can define something as stock or non-stock. If we tick non-stock, then we don't hold any stock holdings of it. It's always zero on hand, and we can use as much as we like. It's infinite stock. Whereas if that's unticked, then it's a stock item, and therefore we are going to manage stock levels, reorders, that sort of a thing. Is it a serialized item? So we handle serialized stock control in TSM as well. So we don't only have 10 units in hand, but we have 10 serial numbers of those units on hand as well, and we can identify what those serial numbers actually are. The rest is not so important. If we go over to the pricing tab, then our first tab really shows us what our costings are. So we have our cost ex tax and inc tax, and then we have our calculated costs, which are basically our average cost, our last cost, our total cost as well. And various companies cost different ways. Some might cost fixed costs, which is this one. Some might cost average cost, which is this one. And some might cost last cost, which is this one down here. And I won't explain it now, but you do need to know the difference between those three different costing methods. We can also set up a trade price, typically used where we have markups on cost to calculate the sell price. And we have 5 different pricing levels set up in TSM. They could be wholesale, they could be retail, and we can just change the labels, by the way. So if I just set this as retail, which is our regular price, and this one is going to be wholesale. And whatever pricing we want to set up. So we've got 5 different levels of pricing. A price can be determined either by being a fixed price that we type in, $20, if I give it a cost of, let's say, $10, or it could be a 50% markup on cost, for example, in there. And so these are various ways that we can calculate our sell price in the system. In our enterprise module, we also have the concept of price breaks. And a price break is, for example, if I can do it by quantity, so I could say something like up to 5 units, we will have a price of $20, and then between 5 and 10, we will have a price of, let's say, $19, for example, and so on. So we can do price breaks based on quantity. We can also do price breaks based on cost. So something that costs us a cent is going to have a higher markup, for example, than something that costs us $5,000, for example. And so we can do our pricing based on the cost of the unit, and we can do so we determine the calculation based on cost or quantity, and then the output is determined by a markup on cost, one of those 5 price levels that we spoke about, or a distinct price that we can type in here, and so on. So that's price breaks. For certain industries, this is very nice. For many others, this is not used at all. Okay. So that's our pricing section. From a inventory point of view, if we enable multi-location stock control, that's an option in the setup, then we have all our locations defined here and on-hand quantities at each individual location that we have. And so van 1 would have so many in stock, van 2 would have so many, van 3 would have so many, and so on. So it tells you exactly where all the stock is at which location, and you can also then get a little summary of what's on order for any of those locations, what's committed, what's available to be sold, what's been requested. You can set your reorder quantity, a reorder point and reorder quantity in here. So when we get down to 10 units in stock, go and reorder 50 units, for example. So you can set that up in here, and through our automatic reordering function, it'll then go and create orders to suppliers.
Can the customer consolidate all this location into one at the end of the day if they want to?
Yes, up here. This is the overall on-hand quantity of all locations combined, right there. Is that what you meant?
I was thinking maybe on the location tab to just put one entry rather than all these different locations.
No, the purpose of this tab is to see all the different locations. That's why we go into this tab, because they want to see all the different locations.
Right.
And they want to see what stock we have in each location.
Okay.
We can also set a supplier by location. Why would we want to do that? Because you might have one location that is in Sydney and another location that is in Melbourne, and therefore there is a different supplier because they happen to be in 2 different states, for example. So you could set a different default supplier for each different location, and then you get over here the average cost of the stock in that location, the last cost, and so on, which is important for some people. If we turn on serialized inventory, we can then have a list of serial numbers, and I don't have any in there, so I'll come back to that when I go and receive some stock in. I'll just make this a serialized, hang on, okay, we might have some serialized items here. No, we don't, that's okay. I'll just go and make this a serialized item, and I'll come back to that. So we have our product locations that we spoke about beforehand. I'll just go add in another one. Okay, and let's just say that I have in our main Sydney warehouse, serialized items. That's a pity. I'll go back to test. Okay, so in our main SA warehouse, for example, I might have 100 units. I'll just set up 100 units in there in stock, but I may want to then go and transfer some stock to another location. So if I go into the Adjust tab over here, I can say from my SA main location into my New South Wales Van 1, I want to transfer 10 units, for example, and I can put various other reference information on there. I'll go and transfer that. And so if I go back to my Locations tab, you will now find that I now have 90 in my SA main, and I now have 10 in my New South Wales Van 1. So we can do transfers from one location to another. So that's what the adjusting function does. We can also receive and issue stock in. So if I'm not using my purchase order module for whatever reason, and I want to just receive in so many units into stock because they just appeared out of nowhere, and I want to do that, or I want to issue out because I'm going to just use them for in-house purposes or whatever, I can receive an issue. So into my New South Wales Van 1, for example, I'll now go and receive another 5 units, and I'll just go and receive those in. And you'll see that I now have 15 units in Van 1 over here.
So if customer return goods back to that particular location.
Yes, you could receive them back into stock using that method. Exactly. So we'll go back to our serialized item. And what I will do is I will go and receive in 10 units of serialized item. So being a serialized type item, I can't just go and receive things in. Right, I can't just receive 10 in because I've got to note the serial numbers. Right, so if I go and I'm going to receive into my New South Wales Van 1 5 units, but I can't do that because the serial numbers always have to have 1. So what I can do is I can click on the serial number button down here, and I can either type in 5 serial numbers with commas between them, or I can say there's a series and it starts at 1000 and there's 5 of them, for example. And so it's going to bring in those serial numbers there. Typically, if you get a batch of new gear coming in, they're sequentially serial numbered, but if they're not, I can put them in manually. And so I put in my 5 units. I can now go and receive those 5 units in. And if I now look at my Locations tab for this serial number 1, you'll see that I have 5 units in New South Wales Van 1. And if I look in the serial number tab, I can see my 5 serial numbers all sitting in that location unused. It's blank, they're not used. And when I brought those particular ones in. So that's how the serial number works, and I'll show you later how we can then consume some serial numbers on jobs. The group tab is very important for some businesses, and in this group tab we can define a bill of materials, a grouped items, kits, or assemblies. So a bill of materials is a header item that composes sub-items. So for example, you might have a consumable, you might have a PC as a bill of material, and that PC comprises a system unit, a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and so on. And so by setting up a system unit item here and assigning into it the relevant bill of items that make it up, I can create a bill of material. I put that one part on a job and all the components go on the job alongside with it. A grouped item is simply, I always put one of these, one of these, one of these, and one of these on the job. And so a grouped item simply lets me easily put those 4 items on the job. by putting the group item on the job, the group item then disappears and the components appear on the job. A kit is very similar, but what a kit does is might be a consumables kit, and a consumables kit contains A, B, C, D, and E. When I put the kit on there, the cost of, so I end up with a single line item on the job, which is the kit, but the stock is decremented by the content of the kit, and the cost of that kit is the sum of the cost of the line items. Okay? Whereas with this one, the cost of the header record, the header item is the cost of the kit, and the cost of the line items are irrelevant in this particular case, but they still adjust the stock by the contents of the kit. But on the invoice, you only see the kit, you don't see anything else. And finally is an assembly. An assembly is where we are going to convert components to a finished item. So for example, if I wanted to build a telephone, then I would have a handset, I would have a unit, I would have a base, I would have a power supply, and I would go and grab all of those components and convert them into a telephone which was in stock and goes into stock. And those components would all go down in stock levels and disappear from stock, and we would have one more phone in stock. So that's where we basically are building finished product from components and putting them into stock. So that's what an assembly is. So that's very important for some companies, once again, not important for others. I can set up a list of alternate parts against this particular part number. And for example, there are many suppliers that have the same item under different part numbers, for example. And so, if you don't have any of these in stock, it may suggest other part numbers for you to go and look at, to go and choose as an alternative to that particular part number. I can create a picture for this particular item here. In our enterprise version, we can then also set up suppliers. And in the supplier section here, we have the supplier's part number used for purchasing purposes. And so that, if I need 5 of these, I can see whichever suppliers I've got, and then I can go and choose which supplier may be based on the lowest cost, or it may be based on location, or it may be based on some other situation. But what I can do is in here is I can set against each supplier its cost for this particular part, so I know. But very interestingly, we may, on the larger sites, negotiate special costings with suppliers just for this particular project. Okay? In which case we can also add in a supplier part number with a job number in here, so that we know that if I'm using this supplier to purchase stuff for this particular job, it should use the negotiated price, not the standard supplier price. Once again, very specific to certain very narrow situations, but it's in there anyway. So that's our supplier pricing tab. We can also set up various models that this part is used on. So for example, if I'm servicing a particular system with a particular air conditioning system with a model, then these are the parts that this model suits, for example. And so when I'm on that model, I can then list just the parts that are relevant for that particular model of equipment as opposed to everything else in stock. So that's what the model is for. I can define, if I'm servicing an M2, this part will come up in the list of parts that are relevant to M2s, for example. I'm going to skip over rates. That's to do with maintenance contracts. I won't go into that. We can set up, we have checklists built into TSN. It's an advanced feature. It can be turned on and off. And every time that and it's mainly used for equipment on jobs, but every single time I add one of these to a job to be serviced, this is the standard checklist that I am going to add to that piece of equipment, because it's relevant to that piece of equipment, whatever it happens to be. So you can set up checklists against individual pieces of equipment. And then we have our history tab, as we do in the other modules. Now you'll note that if you recall, I changed the on-hand quantity of the part to 100. Well, it was -1 to start with. So the on-hand is now 100, which means it actually physically moved 101 into stock. I then transferred 10 out of here. It tells you to location number 2. I then transferred so the 10. So the on-hand quantity was -10 quantity, went from 100 down to 90. I then transferred into location 2, that's the coming in of those 10 units into location 2, and it goes up from 0 up to 10. And then if you recall that I received in externally 5 units into location 2, so the on-hand quantity went up from 10 to 15. So the movements tab, and it tells you that I received 5 from supplier 272. So the movements tab gives you a complete history of the ins and the outs of the product in terms of stock levels and how they get affected. For maintenance contract point of view, I can see all the contracts that this item is on as a piece of equipment, and I can go and view those contracts. I can see all the line items that this item has been purchased from suppliers and go and view any of those purchase orders, and I can look at every time this part has been used on a job as a part, and then go and view that particular job. And of course then I have linked documents against these items or pieces of equipment or whatever. That's probably all I want to show you from the product module at this stage. I'm skipping a bit of detail in terms of purchasing and so on, because I'll come back to that when we actually do those modules. But that is very quickly the products module.